Ultraman was a huge hit, and how could it not be? It had an astonishingly cool title character, an endless supply of quality ambition, imagination, and sincerity. Given an honest chance, it shouldn't be too difficult to see why the original giant from the Land of Light continues to capture imaginations to this day despite some dated effects. A follow-up was inevitable, and it came quickly, in the form of 1967's Ultraseven, a show which revolves around a high-tech organization, the Ultra Garrison, defending the world from larger-than-life threats, and the alien hero, Ultraseven, who steps in to help when things get too tough. Basically, the formula of its predecessor. Except Ultraseven isn't just some uninspired rehash. Ultraman was a colorful fantasy. It's in the title, Ultraman, a special effects fantasy series. But, while it has its fair share of levity as well, Ultraseven leans more into adult science fiction. It has a harder edge, devotes itself completely to alien invasions as opposed to the earthbound focus of the previous show, and it's far more experimental in nature. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to this show. It's proto-Pokemon, the capsule monsters, how the show features one of the most stunningly gorgeous women to grace tokusatsu with her presence. Another topic is Jerry Anderson's immense influence on the show. He's the reason for the focus on vehicles and their many intricate launch scenes. Or one could discuss the massive impact Ultraseven had on the following entries in the Ultra series, or Japanese popular culture at large. It remains one of the most successful shows in the history of Japanese television, you know. But there are two elements I will try to remain focused on here: Ultraseven's thoughtfulness and its experimentation. In Ultraseven, the Earth is constantly beset by various nefarious aliens who wish to conquer or destroy it. The opening line of the show is, it's an uneasiness felt throughout the show, and hints at some of the more serious-minded meditation to come. Ultraseven is commonly described as a thinking man's tokusatsu, and I agree with that notion to an extent. Why only to an extent? Because often enough the show doesn't aspire to be more than standard alien invasion fare, or sometimes the writing only works in its broad strokes rather than its nuance or execution. Still, even if a tad exaggerated, it eventually becomes clear why the show has developed the reputation it has. For comparable science fiction television of its era, think shows like The Twilight Zone and Star Trek, the original series. But here are several examples of interesting ideas Ultraseven has to offer. Episode 25, Showdown at 140 degrees below zero, comments on the expendability of soldiers. Alien Pole showers the Ultra Garrison base in a deadly blizzard and leaves it powerless. The heroes must decide between 1. Probable death from freezing temperatures as they work to restore power, or 2. Deserting their post and leaving the world at risk. The episode raises questions like, are individual lives worth saving, or does the need of the many outweigh those lives? And at what point are efforts just vain? The drama is aided by the fact that the Ultra Garrison has personnel outside of the core team. Seeing these random dudes helps with a sense of immersion, because while I prefer the chemistry of the Science Patrol, how did a handful of people run all of this by themselves? But I digress. Episode 26, Super Weapon R1, tackles the concept of mutually assured destruction and other Cold War concerns. Scientists test a super weapon on a world believed to be lifeless. Unfortunately, it turns out the planet wasn't so lifeless, and the victim of the test promptly travels to Earth. The irradiated monster winds up in an area that looks an awful lot like Urakami Cathedral, post-atomic bomb Urakami Cathedral. And how do the scientists react? They wish to solve the crisis with making bigger and better weapons of mass destruction. As ridiculous as it sounds, it's merely an unflattering reflection of reality. On another note, the show does more than Ultraman with the fact that its title character is an alien living alongside and fighting on behalf of humans. Aliens converse more with Ultraseven, and sometimes plot to remove him before invading the Earth. This is a major plot point in the two-parter, The Seven Assassination Plan. Alien Guts captures Ultraseven and intends to publicly crucify him as a means to demoralize the people of Earth. One of my favorite episodes, The Stolen Ultra Eye, has an alien operative put Dan out of commission by stealing the glasses he needs to become Ultraseven and thus removing the only thing that can stop an interplanetary missile from destroying Earth. While the alien operative cooperates once she learns that she has been left to die by her people, she chooses to take her life rather than live among the people of Earth. Dan, himself an alien who has learned to live in a foreign land, grieves her death. He feels awful that she would rather die than even try to live with a different people or adapt to a new situation. Episode 42, Ambassador of the Non-Malt, puts an interesting spin on the alien invasion formula. Humanity is presented as the aggressive invaders who forced the original inhabitants of the Earth, the non-malts, to take refuge beneath the waves centuries ago. Recent human expansion into the ocean threatens the domain of the non-malts, and the results are tragic. There's some very murky morality on display as well. For instance, the captain of the Ultra garrison quickly dismisses the possibility that the non-malts were telling the truth, and almost casually, and arguably gleefully, genocides their entire race. Eyebrow-raising, to say the least. Finally, in Episode 8, The Marked Town, aliens aim to conquer Earth without firing a shot by using lace cigarettes to turn humans on one another. Of course, in the end, the plot is exposed and the day saved. But, in the final moments of the episode, viewers are left with this reality check.
メトロン星人の地球侵略計画はこうして終わったのです。人間同士の信頼感を利用するとは恐るべき宇宙人です。でもご安心ください。このお話は遠い遠い未来の物語なのです。なぜですって？我々人類は今宇宙人に狙われるほどお互いを信頼してはいません。
Whether or not the words on paper are stellar, the writing is usually elevated by its infectious score and imaginative filmmaking, something that applies to both the drama and spectacle. For an example of the former, look no further than the surreal nature of Episode 31, The Devil Who Dwells in a Flower. There's this entire dreamlike sequence dedicated to a young woman possessed by a space virus and the member of the Ultra garrison she has brainwashed, bonding on a merry-go-round. Later, the episode turns into a medical procedural. And even later, Ultraseven, who shrinks down to microscopic size, has to enter the young woman's body and destroy the virus within, reminiscent of 1966's Fantastic Voyage. All of this concludes with the young woman who has no memory of her time under the virus's influence, holding an attachment to the garrison member she bonded with earlier, an ending which ties a bow on the overall surreal nature of the episode. More fascinating, however, are episodes directed by Akio Jisoji. Jisoji, the man behind many of the best and most unconventional episodes of Ultraman and Ultraseven, could be relied on to consistently produce abstract imagery and play with light and shadow to very interesting effect. Signatures of his style include claustrophobic close-ups, low angles, young boys in short shorts, and an exploration of surrealistic or dark subject matter, some of which is a mere taste of the work he would soon be doing outside of tokusatsu. In addition, his influence on the work of Hideaki Anno and Neon Genesis Evangelion should be readily apparent. Okay, let's get this out of the way now. These are men in suits, these are miniature buildings, this is a matte painting, and these are props moved with wires, sometimes visible wires. It's not fooling anyone. Even I, a seasoned tokusatsu viewer, can admit this show can be hokey at times. But ignore that for a second. What should matter is what the creative team does with these tools, and this is another area where the show shines bright. The effects work boast a decent level of polish for a 60s Japanese television and enough creativity to rank among the best classic tokusatsu features, film or television. It was around this time that the Godzilla productions stopped pushing boundaries and the Ultra series took its place. Heck, there are tokusatsu movies released decades after this show, made with a lot more money, that aren't even half as inspired. Look at Ultraseven himself, another example of taking the basic form of Ultraman and going in a different, yet faithful direction. I had apprehensions about him initially, though the Mayan-influenced aesthetic of his armor eventually won me over. Then there's the Eye Slugger. Functionally, it's similar to Ultraman's Ultra Slash. However, that is a boomerang and it doubles as a blade takes it to the next level, and adds new dynamics to the fights. For example, you knew things were serious when something like this happens. But let's see how this philosophy carries over into other areas. Of course, there's the men in tight-fitting and dinosaur-like suits, but there's also puppetry. Check out the fight with this face-hugger-looking creature in episode 5, The Erased Time. For one, the camera work makes the most of the surrounding traditional Japanese architecture. The men at Super Riot Productions knew how to get mileage from their foregrounds. Even if it doesn't convince the viewer that these are behemoths duking it out, it's usually interesting to look at. Anyway, the dogfight, which the focus switches back and forth to throughout, adds to the intensity and distracts from the limited nature of the puppet opponent. The last spacecraft landing on and setting aflame the dying giant alien is a fine finish to the aborted invasion attempt. Now, take a look at this exchange in episode 30, Glory for Whom. First there's the giants charging at one another, and you get close-up shots of each character's feet running towards the camera. Once they meet, the camera bounces back and forth between their upper and lower body as they battle, which makes for a chaotic exchange. Next, Ultraseven tosses his enemy behind a hill, and the camera zooms away as he stomps said enemy into the dirt. The volume of the music lowers as the camera zooms out, a fade conveys the passage of time, and what exactly happened behind that hill is left to the imagination of the viewers. But there's no doubt that it was an intense struggle, and the struggle is further sold by what is shown the next time the combatants are visible. Both are exhausted and crawling across the landscape towards one another, determined to continue their tiring duel. And in this fight, a frustrated, injured Ultraseven abandons discipline and slits the throat of his enemy. The act of violence and sight of yellow radioactive blood polluting the surrounding area is a sharp contrast to the otherwise beautiful landscape and cheery music. And then there's the insanity of the climax of episode 45, The Saucers Have Come. A frenzy of bright lights, sped-up footage, and superimposed images of explosions, stars, monsters, and spacecraft. One of my favorite battles in the show. But fights are not the only thing to get an upgrade from Ultraman. Ultraseven also increases the complexity of the environments. Here, Ultraseven and his foe are overwhelmed by a violent mix of wind and rain. And here, two monsters battle it out in an unforgiving wintry nightmare. Not everything works, but the commitment to experimentation is nothing short of admirable. I know this was brief, but hopefully it was a helpful look at what to expect from Ultraseven. While unmistakably a continuation of what came before it, Ultraseven also established its own identity. It traded the fantasy and smiles for commentary and moodiness fit for its tumultuous times. The late 60s were defined by assassinations, controversial wars, a space race, and civil rights movements. If you're an existing Tokusatsu fan and haven't watched Ultraseven, what are you doing? But if you're new to this whole Tokusatsu thing, Ultraseven wouldn't be a bad place to start. It might not be as modern or seamless in its effects as the newer content out there. It will require some open-mindedness. And with that said, it certainly isn't high art. But if you want something with some substance and imagination, Ultraseven is a good place to look. And when everything about this show clicks, it's easily some of the finest material Tokusatsu has ever produced.